Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Drew Soman. I am a freelance concept artist and illustrator here with a time-lapse video of my process for digital painting in Photoshop. I hope you find this video useful or at least informative. It's kind of my first foray into the YouTube-verse, but I will be covering both general and specific topics past the holiday break. So if you have any feedback, questions, comments, leave them here, and maybe they'll get covered in a future video. Alright, let's get into it. First, we start with the sketching phase where we try to figure out what kind of subject and composition we are going for. Now, I didn't really have a concrete idea of the subject that I wanted to do in this piece. I knew ahead of time I wanted an idyllic setting with the interplay of pink and blue tones, and I wanted a figure that was delicate and warming. And so that's kind of what I started with. I added in the idea that maybe she was a villager that was walking around town and she has a little basket, and you know what else is happening in the scene isn't really important, and so you'll see actually in the future that the background isn't as delineated as she is towards the end of rendering. For me, it's important to get the focus on the right places, and for her it is going to be on her face and kind of the upper half of her body and her basket, because those are the parts that tell the story. And then of course you have the doors and the trees in the background, but as long as you understand what they are, you don't really have to focus too much on them. They're just there to help frame and set up the story. Now, the way that I'm sketching for this, you'll see that I'm using a very rough brush because we're going to be doing about 3 passes over this. One with a kind of just the rough generic idea of the character, the second one to establish the forms, and the third to be our anchor points. I guess at that stage you would probably do it as your line art, but this is going to be mostly painted over, so we're not going to be super precious with our line work. It's just going to be there to establish the shapes. So right now I am just trying to get the essence of the character. Afterwards, we fill in the areas that we want to be the darker elements, just so we can get a sense of the composition, what we're going for. It's a pretty simple step of just lassoing and filling. And then afterwards, we're working up the next layer of the sketch. This one, we're kind of trying to figure out who she is, more of her physical features, how her hair falls. This is a time where you can, change a lot that's going on. The base shape is really just there to get you something to carve into. It's kind of weird. I do a lot of times tend to treat my painting as if I was sculpting. I did a bit of 3D modeling back in the day, and it helped when I was trying to learn digital painting to think of the character as something you're sculpting with light. Just putting in whatever we need. We're not gonna get too detailed with the line work just yet. As long as it tells you what the form is, that's enough. We put in the textural elements, we put in the base shapes, because we're going to be painting over a lot of this. And a lot of these forms are relatively simple. If you had something that was, I guess, less organic, more machine-like, something like an automobile or a vehicle, you could spend a lot more time on your line art, because it will save you a lot of stress and trouble later down the line when you're trying to figure out exactly how are you supposed to light this stuff. Because that's when we're doing this painting, that's what the lighting is helping us do. It's helping us figure out, what's in the light, what's in the shadow, because it brings things back and forth for you, and you can figure out from there how you're going to layer down your lights and your darks. A little bit of hand work, just because. I feel like the face and the hands are the most important parts to put the most detail in, just because if you're working on a portrait, it's kind of the point of the portrait. There are cases where it's not, if you're putting in a hidden serpent or something. So now we're going to be working on getting the values arranged for this piece. So we are putting in our lights and our darks. Our lines kind of are our darkest darks. They're going to be the places where we have the most ambient occlusion. So we're more interested in putting in the lights than we are putting in the super darks. Also, I imagine this piece to be kind of like, lit from a misty afternoon, so I imagine that the bounce light from the floor would kill some of the harsher blacks while keeping the whites pretty nice and bright. We move on to doing some color planning. I have just 2 layers that I drew this with. I do a color layer, which is just a simple adjustment on your layer, and I paint in the colors that I want. And then once I have the base colors, if I need to change the settings, then I will use different types of layers to achieve value changes and color changes. I then tried using a gradient map to unify some of the colors a little bit more. We're not using that many, but still it helps to bring everything together, so when you're painting on top of it, you have some base colors to go with. I tend to recommend using only around 3 to 4 colors to start with. You can always add the extra ones in later, although sometimes it is fun to just embrace the chaos and put whatever you want down and slowly build backwards from there as well. But for this painting, I really wanted to take a nice casual approach, so I made things as easy as I could for myself. Once your base colors are established, you can go in and add in the additional colors that you want. You'll see me here also adding in a few value changes as well, just so I can have a good sense for when I'm going to do the structuring, which will happen once I finish doing the last line art stage, which we're about to start now. Now at this stage, again, we're not trying to get too perfect with the lines. They really are there just to get us the anchor points that we need to figure out the painting later on, because when you place your lines, you're establishing the shape language you're going to be using. You remove a lot of the guesswork as well. In other videos, you're going to see me blending these steps kind of together. Sometimes you'll see me paint, then draw, then paint, then draw. Perfectly fine if you're doing that right now. This is just a way of breaking into stages in case you're starting this for the first time and you kind of want to figure out what will be a good place to start with to give me enough structure and control. One of the things that you really want to have in your painting is to make sure you're always in control of it. I think for me, I normally get overwhelmed when I'm not sure what I'm doing and I feel like I'm no longer in control of where this painting is going. And sometimes it helps just to go backwards and get to a point where you were in control and start again. There's no shame in that. The brush I'm using here is a pretty fine one and one I use commonly when I am working on lines that I'm not going to be keeping. It honestly is just a basic brush that has the transparency set down. You don't really need that many brushes to be successful with your painting. It honestly comes down to how you layer them. The textures you get from doing the unique brushes and that kind of stuff, they're good at the last minute, but honestly, they can, if you're going for a piece that has very smooth areas in it, it can sometimes throw you off. So, just be careful with that. Again, this process is something I like to keep as organic as possible, just because you never know what you're going to discover you did not want in your painting until the end. There's no way to, unless you do it twice, to realize how you're going to be planning it. Alright, once I have my lines where I want them, I fill in the areas with the base colors that I think I'm going to need. You'll see me trying a whole bunch of different ones here, because sometimes you want to go darker or lighter so you can build on top of them. And sometimes it helps to go darker if you're going for a darker element, just because even if you have the lighter color as part of the main sections, having that light color will throw you off. And so I painted her skin darker, knowing that I'm going to push it back up into its normal tone afterwards. Even with the blues, it sounds strange. I actually think I took them darker for the hair and lighter for the clothing. But sometimes you just want to establish a basic shape and you can work off of it. The nice thing too is once you have these shapes layered out as flats, you can always reselect them and use them as your masking tools if you want to paint more precisely. It's not going to be too much of an issue here with us just because we're not going to be painting super precisely. This is, again, a very casual piece, nice little introduction to, just painting for fun and seeing where the art kind of takes you. The nice thing is we've established a lot with our line work. We established a good deal with our uh, our color planning and our value planning. So at this point, we are just going to be focusing on structuring. And structuring is going to be about 90% of this video, because once you're done with structuring, you have a painting. I try to fill in as much as I can, just because it will give me a better idea of what the character is going to look like. And already she's kind of coming to life with the colors in place. Although we've removed a lot of the shading, we're going to be putting that back in, and I can see where she's going a lot better with having the full colors where they are. There's no trick to this. You can do it on multiple layers, you can do it on a single layer, you can even do it by hand. Honestly, I did it with the lasso just because it is easier. Don't feel pressured to use it. It is a tool that is going to speed up your painting, but if you're not in control, again, you don't need to. I just use it because it's become easier for me to use. I started filling in some of the shapes I want in the door. I kind of wanted a wooden door with carved wood, something that would probably be, kind of annoying to carve in real life, but that's why we're painting. We get to have fun here. All right, I'm blocking in the bigger shapes in the background just so we can get a lot of the business out of the way. In future videos, you'll hear me talk about large, medium, and small shapes. When you're starting off your planning, you kind of want to plan with your big shapes first, and then slowly move into your medium shapes and your smaller shapes. And your smaller shapes probably won't even come into play until you start the last 20% of your painting. I do apologize if I sound a bit hoarse. Just coming back from a bout of cold. But I did want to get one of these YouTube videos out before the year was done. Right now we're putting in the brightest highlights that are going to be on her skin from a side light that's coming in. This isn't 100% accurate, of course, but I'm putting it where I think it will be fun to catch some brighter highlights and to make some lighter shapes to cut into her silhouette to make a more fun composition. Sometimes you can take these cheats, sometimes you're going to need reference to take these cheats. Most of the time you're going to need reference. Always use reference if you have it. I actually looked online for a few images of people being hit by the sun just so I can see kind of what I wanted to go with. Even though this is a stylized piece, not photoreal in any sense of the word, having the light read properly will ground your piece regardless of what kind of style you're using. Now at this point we can actually start doing the structuring. And the structuring entails putting in the lights and shadows that are going to make the forms stand out. It's going to be organizing a lot of the middle shapes so that they read better in the last part of the image. And of course, it's refining everything so we have a painting that looks a little bit cleaner than it does right now. There's no kind of rhyme or reason to how I do this. I tend to work triage, which is that I assume everything on the painting is bleeding and I have to stop the bleeding everywhere at once. And so you'll see me pick a little here, pick a little there, and from there we eventually get to the point where we need to be. You can take your time and do one section at a time, but I like to zoom out and check the painting often so I can see how it's going. Because you don't want to be so close up that you're looking at this painting for so long that you forgot exactly why you were painting what you were painting. Sometimes that little bit of hair can wait towards the end. But indulge, sometimes it's fun just to stay in. I recommend at least every half an hour if you're doing digital painting to zoom out. I zoom out probably every 5 minutes just because I'm paranoid like that. I'm using a few different brushes here. I'm using a soft hexagonal brush to do some of my fills, and I'm using a much harsher linear brush to do the carving of shapes that need to be a little bit more distinct. And then I have a diamond brush that kind of functions as an in-between between the two of them, which is fun for smaller shapes and things that need angles. A lot of what you see me painting seems like it's being done out of memory. A lot of this is stuff that I either recently painted in another painting where I had the reference for it, or it's stuff that you just have an open picture of something that's kind of like what you need, and you use it as reference. Uh, I recommend, if you can, get as specific reference as you can, but if you can't, honestly, even the basis picture that has something to do with what you're doing might be helpful instead. You don't have to go it alone. No one's doing this completely from their head, including me. I have probably 10 photos open. I think I'll try to get my reference as a separate thing I can put into the video, so you guys can see how I do my reference gathering. Honestly, it is just a horrific amount of tabs that are open while I'm listening to music. And even when you have all of the reference in the world, sometimes you're going to do things that are going to be wrong or inappropriate, either because you followed the reference too well or you didn't do it enough. At this point, we are adding in things that feel right, things that feel clean, just to help us get through the section. You'll see me change back and forth between lighter and darker shades. Sometimes I feel like it should be lighter, sometimes darker. Again, we are working with much less of a cinematic or candid shot, and we're working with the idea that there's a photo shoot happening, and there's enough of artificial light source that you can see her through the side light that's coming in. It's not a super dark sequence. I wanted it to feel kind of warm and inviting, and so we're going to keep a lot of these colors pretty light, and the shadows are going to be minimal. If we were doing it differently, you'd see a lot more shadows in the core of her where the light didn't reach her, but we're playing this a little bit loose. And again, at this point, I'm not using brushes that are much different than each other. These are the same ones that I employed while doing my sketching. I have a lot of brushes that I use, but most of them don't come out towards the middle of the painting. They come out towards the end where I'm adding in finishing touches. If you're working a little bit looser to start with, it might be better to utilize a wider variety of brushes. But again, I'm of the camp of using as few brushes as possible to get the job done. The most important tool you have is your sense of lighting and your reference, and those things are way more important than your brushes will ever be, so don't worry too much about that. I know a lot of people tend to ask that question of what brush should I use. You use the brush you like, and there might be brushes that better serve your work, but there's no skeleton key brush that is going to do the job for everyone. Yeah, and so I'm honestly working with a mixture of essentially a hard edge and a soft edge brush, because essentially what I'm trying to accomplish is having harder and softer edges where I need them, and then later on, if I need something broken down into smaller bits, I can use a particular shaped brush to get that effect. But we're not using anything gimmicky here. You can, and there's ways to use them. I guess I can cover that in a different tutorial, but I primarily enjoy just painting with softer brushes and bringing edges back into the fold afterwards, or painting a very chiseled feature and then slowly softening it out instead. Again, I think it's more important for you to learn what you're comfortable with, what you're most effective with, and also what you enjoy using. You're doing art because you enjoy it. You might as well find a process you enjoy. That way you can focus way more on your subject matter, the things you care about, and less on the tool sets. And you can have multiple tool sets as well. Like when I'm painting more realistic figures, I tend to use bristlier brushes, things that have a little bit more texture to them. That way I can lay them down. And then sometimes when I'm painting things that are super high detail, I'm only using the round brush because I need to control where every pixel is going. So, your mileage will vary depending on what you want to use, and also what your client needs you to use. If you're working on a very, very tightly rendered splash screen, you're going to spend your time with a lot of hard-edged brushes in one section of your painting, and super soft but bristly texture brushes in others. Here we're just doing little carvings into the face, trying to eliminate parts that are either going to be distracting because they're not rendered properly or that are inaccurate. Um, Coming up soon, you'll see me using the warp tool to help make the character's face read more the way I want it to. Because as it stands, I think her eyebrows are a bit high. I put them there just because I wanted to have her keep a good level of expression. But I think now, looking at it with the colors in it, it definitely does seem a bit high. And so I will be utilizing the liquify tool to bring that stuff down. Again, zooming out always, it's super useful to do to get a good grip on what you're working on. Here you see me using the liquify tool really quickly, trying to figure out exactly how I want to maneuver the eyes and the eyebrows to be a little bit more harmonized and to just feel a little bit more appealing and natural, while still keeping the kind of cartoony raised eyebrow that she seems to have. But I kind of like this look for her, a kind of exiguous lady with like a long ears and a long neck and a long nose, a little bit more elven, I guess. I like elves, so. At this point, we are adding in things that feel right, things that feel clean, just to help us get through the section. You'll see me change back and forth between lighter and darker shades. Sometimes I feel like it should be lighter, sometimes darker. Again, we are working with much less of a cinematic or candid shot, and we're working with the idea that there's a photo shoot happening and there's enough of artificial light source that you can see her through the side light that's coming in. It's not a super dark sequence. I wanted it to feel kind of warm and inviting. And so we're going to keep a lot of these colors pretty light, and the shadows are going to be minimal. If we were doing it differently, you'd see a lot more shadows in the core of her where the light didn't reach her, but we're playing this a little bit loose. And again, at this point, I'm not using brushes that are much different than each other. These are the same ones that I employed while doing my sketching. I have a lot of brushes that I use, but most of them don't come out towards the middle of the painting. They come out towards the end where I'm adding in finishing touches. And at this point, we're going back and forth in triage now. We are working on the doors, putting in the handles. Once you do that, you tend to see how much the range of darks and lights seems to increase. Once you have your darkest and lightest elements in your piece, it's much easier to anchor every other color into place. And so we're just trying to figure out exactly what we want to do with these trees. We're not completely sure yet. I think we're gonna go with it's like a dappled lit tree canopy with maybe a forest road or a city road, and she's walking through a gate. And as we do the structuring and we're getting the more general stuff out of the way, we slowly start working towards being specific. And at this point, I would say we've swapped over to doing rendering. Because if you look at her, most of the elements that her design needs are there. And, there are corrections to be made, but they're not huge. They're things you can do at the end of your painting or, honestly, whenever you want to. And I'll worry about that stuff at the end when it comes up. But for now, I'm just playing around trying to figure out what it is that I want this background to be. I'll end up not painting it in, but honestly at this point I'm still entertaining the idea of it being like a full resplendent courtyard, something beautiful and you know, filled with like fruit trees and that kind of stuff. But I'm also reminded that this is about the central figure and not so much about the backgrounds. These things are just framing elements for her. And you know, it's important when you're doing a piece. It's easy to get more confused when you're doing a full body than when you're doing just a bust. A bust tends to center itself. But when you're doing a full body, you know, you might be doing it to describe the background and the body is just the prop. And you know, sometimes it is a full portrait and you need to, you know, keep everything focused where you want it. If I did want to do a much more complicated background, I'd have to spend more time making sure there's a lot more detail on the face and the hands and the like body area to illustrate that they're still the center of focus. So, you know, why start making YouTube videos in the middle of the holiday rush? At first, I thought to hold this one back until the new year, but you know, I also thought it might feel good to not have this as a New Year's resolution, and instead of, you know, starting 2020 saying I'll make a video, I can say at the end of 2019, you know, I was capable of trying and doing new things. You know, so let me, you know, use this as a moment to encourage anyone. You know, don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you it's too late or early to start something that you're excited to work on. You know, don't feel pressured by a time threshold, like a New Year's date, unless of course it's in your contract, and by all means embrace that pressure and get it done. You know, but you can do anything you want to at any point, and there's no reason to worry about, I only got 2 weeks left in the year. 2 weeks left in the year, you know, make something small. You know, do a sketch in your book that you're going to use for the next year. I should also say the total time it took to make this painting was around 10 hours. This is sped up a lot. So in the same vein of not feeling pressured to not make things, like don't feel pressured by speed paintings to make things very quickly. Speed paintings are a great way of practicing, but they can also give you panic if you don't make something really quickly. I still get that to this day when I'm working on things. I'm like, oh, I should have been done way earlier on this. But you know, in some cases it can't be helped. In some cases you have to grow. So, you know, allow yourself to grow and to figure out how to do these things in your own time. And I promise you that you'll get there, because I was in the boat of thinking that for years, and I had, you know, good friends and mentors reminding me that slowing down was an option, and it still is an option for me, and it is one for you as well. You know, so take the time and enjoy this process. And I hope that, you know, at the end of the day, that if you're starting this at any age, you realize that you can start whenever you want. Painting is something that fortunately it's not something you're born with. It's something that you have to practice. You know, it is a bit of a time sink, but it is nice to know that, you know, if you're 70 coming into this, you can be a master in 2 years if you sit down to the craft and make it happen. And if it doesn't, like me, you can enjoy the journey up hill and figuring out how to make things. It's funny how the blocking and rendering phases tend to blend in to each other. Sometimes you'll get lost in between them and you won't even realize that you've gone from one to the other. But it is really important to make sure your structuring is there, because once you're done with that, you have a painting. You know, at this point, we honestly are just painting in what we want to, and we're enjoying the process a lot more. Yeah, the very last thing we're going to be doing is just adding in a noise layer. And once we're done with that, we're just going to be adding in like a level layer and a little bit more color dodge to get it exactly where we want it. So you'll see me here, I'm just putting in some of the bounce lights that are going into the light is not being the key, in the sense that skylight tends to be colder, so I'm having the elements that are facing towards and above the camera being lighter. The elements that are below are catching the light from the floor, so it tends to be warmer, and so you have the bounce lights on the bottom of her dress, her sleeves, and of course on the basket as well. Her head's a little high up for it, so I don't have too much of it on it. I could, if I wanted to, have that be part of the image. Maybe it's like super duper midday and the sun's sweltering hot, and you kind of want to make her feel like she has the sun beating down on her. You know, you can exaggerate your light sources as need be. Yeah, once you're done with your structuring, you have a painting, this is the part where you get to enjoy yourself and just do the rendering that you want to do. You can spend as much time or as little time as you want here. The question of doneness, it's kind of up to you. A lot of people will ask, when is the painting done? And I will say, like I said before, that a painting is done when you no longer have anything to add to it. And sometimes for you that was going to be, an hour of work. It might be 4 hours of work. I wouldn't feel too bad either way about it. Which is great because, while this section is, it's important to softening the lines of the painting, adding in hard lines where we need to, but a lot of it is there, so there's little to build on, and better than having really take that much time, compared to doing egregious errors later on down the line. And I hope that seeing this process from start to finish, that you get a sense of why
here I'm using a pretty large brush
the line layers, the flats,
and only
doing
shrinking
the color
it down
planning and all of this works
angle,
as,
and sometimes just using the larger brush to make those
good
angles anyway. You're going to
want
a
foundation to painting,
be
and,
efficient
while you
with
kind of want to put as much placement of your resources there
paint strokes
before you start doing,
even though we're further ahead
things
with
like
the
adding
character,
eyelashes,
the background still
breaking down
needs
an
a little bit
eyebrow,
more planning,
adding
so
glints to the lips and that kind
here
of stuff.
I am
when you're
making
working on a
sure
portrait.
that
Those things are nice,
the
and
strokes I'm
super
putting
fun
down
to do.
Aren't going to be super
But
distracting when I'm trying to
They
figure out
work
what's going
better
on.
when you
if
know
put on
where they're going to be
heavy
going,
dark
as opposed to
strokes,
having
it
to
becomes a bit
develop
of a
the
mess
whole
there.
thing all
so
at once.
keeping it light,
So
just putting in what I
if you don't
need to see
do
the background.
structuring,
If I
maybe try it
choose
out
to further
it might
develop
work
it, I
out
can,
for you.
and if I need to wipe it out and start again, I also can. It's a nice thing about working the process this way. Is we're just putting in the information we need to convey the light source and to, just make sure that we're having the character match the environment we're going to have in the end. We're having a little bit more focus on honestly what's going on in the door. Just trying to add in a few more elements. We don't really have a foreground here, so these two places are really all I'm going to use to establish where she is. And hopefully by the end we believe that she is walking through this little garden gate. But maybe if we had some more foreground elements, I would spend less detail on here, kind of push them back. But for right now, since I'm not using like a statue or something in the foreground or background to establish the location, these are kind of the anchor points that I get to work with. So I'll be putting a little bit more detail on the handles and the parts of the door that are closer to her, and allowing the details to kind of fade out towards the edges. It's also why I'm trying to keep the background as blurred as possible, so we kind of create some space and we make this area look a little bit more expansive, and not so much that she's like walking into like a cramped space. Maybe she's opening like a garden gate or something like that. We're building up edges. You can still see them, but we're also trying to keep things soft where we can. I tend to like the softened edges after painting. You see that I've kind of kept this crisp, and towards the last part of the render phase, we'll be phasing out sections. I find it's easier to fade things out than to bring them back into focus. So I tend to paint with my fills and then keep everything nice and hard, and slowly soften out the pieces that aren't going to make the final cut of the focal point. Things like hair will get extra strands to break up their hard shapes. The areas in between the door spaces could get a little bit more light to help weaken the contrast between the light and dark spaces. So the most contrast we have is around her form itself. You'll see here, even towards the very end of rendering, I am still using just the same few brushes, one that's hard, one that's soft, and you're just working between a combination of those things where you're trying to enhance some edges and then have other ones fade away. And by doing so, you're controlling the textures, the silhouettes that you're trying to get across, and thus affecting the read. You know, I go a lot about the read of the piece, but that's the most important thing you can think of when you are working on this piece, because when you show it to someone, they have, you know, a certain amount of time that they're going to look at it, and if they don't get what's there in that amount of time, you know, they're not going to really sit and stay and wait for the meaning to come to them. And then simultaneously, even if they get a nice read from it, then you want them to stay. So that's what your details are going to be for. That's kind of why we're doing this rendering phase to begin with, is, you know, all these little meaty bits of, like, you know, tiny bits of hair, little reflective lights on the eyes, on the buttons. Those are things that you stay for. Those are the things that keep your attention. But first, you kind of need the big shapes to work. And that's also why we work between this hierarchy of you know, large to small, so that your large shapes, they establish just the basic structure, your middle shapes establish the context, and finally your tiny shapes, they kind of give the last bits of tone and quality. You know, something that's shiny is wet, something that is matte is dry. You know, you can get more and more information about something. It's almost like if you're walking closer to it slowly. I guess in the digital world, it's zooming in, and in the physical world, it's, you know, walking closer to a painting and admiring the little strokes. And of course, there is just the basic aesthetic aspect of, you know, details look nice. Don't underestimate the potency of, you know, child logic, that, you know, nice colors work because they're nice colors, and, you know, details work because they're details. But it's nice that we have a lot of the structure in place so that we can work on our details freely. We don't have to worry about, you know, if they're going to ruin a shape or even make an interesting shape, because we already have those things established before. So, you know, if you haven't tried working within a structure of, you know, doing the line work, doing the flats and the color planning, it might be a good way to add structure and control to your process. And, you know, the steps that you enjoy, you can keep, and the ones you don't like, you can, of course, throw back into the ether where they belong. But for me, this works out pretty well. It's a good way of making consistent work. And of course, sometimes I blend my steps. There's no problem in doing that as well. Yeah, you'll see me here just adding in, you know, floor details, background details, and immediately swapping back to working on forehead polish. And that kind of forehead polish, we'll just say it. Imagine I said something different. You know, this is kind of what I was speaking about before with triage. Like, you know, sometimes when you're looking at a painting, you want to see it as a whole, and it helps to kind of have a gauge of where you're going. And so I tend to go sweeping from background to foreground, foreground to background, and then I will spend a good hour on just one element once I feel like I'm ready to commit it down. So, you know, if you're the kind of person to, you know, pick off one thing at a time, perfectly fine.
If you like to blend all your food together, perfectly fine. Painting accommodates both tastes beautifully. So, and digital painting even better so. So, do what you like, and use what you like to both fuel your ability to make art, but also to make it easier for you to make your art. There's no reason to make this any more difficult than it needs to be for yourself, just for some strange particular moral victory. I'm planning to do more specific videos on particular topics in addition to the time lapses and some other things I haven't planned that are going to be fun. But if you guys have any ideas, again, just leave them in the comments. You can message me on Twitter or Instagram, I think, and just leave me whatever feedback that you have, and I can start assembling some of the questions that I get in common and making a tutorial about that. It's kind of the reason why I started this. Is a lot of people were asking me questions on Twitter, and they would be the same questions, but it'd also be pretty vague questions, as like how do you do this, and I'd be like, well, do what specifically? And so I figure I'll do the time lapses as just, if you have a particular part, you can always just pause there, and then for those of you who want to ask the questions, we can break down brush presets, how to establish lighting, looking at reference and how to study from reference, how to use reference properly, color theory, color planning, even silly things like what to paint, what particular subjects am I inspired by, how to find inspiration, and that kind of stuff. I plan to get a lot of that done within the new year. I just honestly wanted to start a YouTube video as soon as I could, because I wanted to challenge myself before the end of the year to get one out. And again, just to remind you, I am working from reference. I do have it on my other screen. I have a 2-screen setup. I work on a Wacom Cintiq. I guess I can take some time here to talk about the tech that I use. I mainly use Photoshop to do my work. I've been working in Photoshop for around 11 years now. I started really trying to learn it in 2008. I dabbled with it beforehand, but I was so daunted by it that I kind of just put it down. I was like, I'm never going to use anything other than colored pencils the rest of my life, because it was what I knew. But in 2008, my best friend Lauren, if you're watching, hi, and my other friend John, they were nice enough to sit me down and teach me everything that they knew. Until probably around 5 years ago, I wasn't even that confident in the art that I was creating. It honestly kind of snowballed more recently, and I still have a ways to go. But in that same vein, I'm kind of excited to see what the future holds, because I never thought I'd get to the point I am right now. And I'm sure a lot of you, you look at some of your favorite artists and you wonder, oh man, I'm never going to hit that point. And, take it from an old man that, it happens. You'll get there in time. It honestly just takes the time to do it. I do love Photoshop. I love all the different tools that you have outside just the painting tools. Lots of effects you can add in. I'm not sure about the other programs, but I know a lot of people also use those with great results. Use the program that works for you. Some people will like Photoshop, some people will not. I've heard a lot of good things about Psy. I might look into it. I think some of my favorite artists actually work in Psy as well, so I kind of grew up with this program, so it's kind of my bread and butter. I am excited to learn more about Procreate and see where it can go, and I am also dabbling a little bit into the animation controls there, so expect some videos about that soon as well. Photoshop, I think it also has a lot of support
for it. So it might be an easier tool to get started with if the price point isn't an issue. I know there's also some pretty good alternative digital painting programs. In the end, use what works for you and be okay with switching, because sometimes you think you know what's going to work for you, but it might just only be useful to you for a few years until you need to move on to something else. That was me with colored pencils. They worked super well for me, but this was a step that was necessary for me to make the art that I wanted to make. And I'm super happy that I made the jump. And I hope you are too when you do, or if you already have, I hope it served you well. Soft strands of hair help to break up the harder outline of the shape. I'm keeping it hard around the edges of the face just because I kind of want the roundness to play on one side and the softness to play on the other. The contrast is kind of nice. So, you could of course spend a lot more time taking these hair tendrils and making them way softer. There's ways to do it, but this is not the painting for it. Right now we're just adding in a little bit of glints and highlights, cleaning up the lines, wherever we find the line work that was there before that's kind of egregious, we're taking it out. And you'll see that we're also going to take that leafy substance. I should have figured out what that was, but I guess it wasn't important at the time. And we're going to bluify it a little bit just to get rid of some of the contrast it's having there as well. Painting a lot of times is about trying to figure out how you get your focus where you want it, and also establishing your tone. And our tone is pretty well established here, so right now we're adjusting where our focus is going to be with the final bits and pieces. I'm not putting too much detail in the hand just yet. We don't really need it. Most of the action is kind of in the face. It's mostly in the top half of our painting. We don't need the hand to have any more than it does. Same thing with the bow. Like, we could spend a lot more time on that bow, but it's not really that important for what we're doing. This piece is so zoomed out that focusing on micro details, I think, kind of defeats the purpose unless you want to do a full pass again on everything else that you see. I really do enjoy this part of the painting process. I feel like this is everyone's favorite part. This is the kind of the frosting on the cake. The zen moment you just get to, fade out, fade back in, and be really present with yourself and your environment, and just enjoying painting as a process. I do enjoy the other parts as well, don't get me wrong. I think what it is for this part is I can see the finish line. I think the one thing that I've been trying to practice in my own painting is to make sure whatever purpose I have, I fulfill it. It's actually not that difficult to get a result in digital painting, but it is difficult to get a specific result. And, specificity and intention are super important. I debated increasing the range of darks in this piece, but honestly, I feel like the lights are more important. Keeping the darks, centralized towards the figure in the door probably was the best move that I could make. So I just kept the same course. And I really wanted to make sure this painting kept on brand when it comes to the tone and the mood. And I think I did a pretty good job at keeping it there. I'll add a few tonal changes, some brightness in the end, But overall, I don't think it affected the kind of delicate dance between the light pinks and the darker, more rosy colors. And there's something about this kind of color scheme that I just love. I'm a big fan of blue, pink, and teal orange, so you'll see that come up a lot. You'll just have to forgive me for it. But I really wanted to make sure that it read at a particular time of day, and for me, it had to have been the morning hours. I think at this point, I kind of settled it. You know, she is Belle about to make her way downtown, and you know, maybe she's leaving her house or maybe she's entering a village, but this is a welcome to the day kind of setting. And I'm super happy with the colors that I've been choosing for it. Alright, nothing left to do now than to finish up the rendering. Any final strokes we want to put in before we move into doing the adjustment layers and the final color grading. Alright, let's finish up. So our final things that we're going to be doing is adding in a little bit extra pink in that background, just to get it to be a little bit more rosy than the dress, because I wanted the dress to read, I think, more of a mauve color, or like a dusty rose than a bright, like, floral pink. And so having a bit extra pink in the background works. We'll also be blurring out this layer towards the end, but before that we add a noise layer, just a slight one, I think around 20%, and we'll add, of course, some color dodge stuff, which we're working in digital painting, so why not treat ourselves to a little extra brightness wherever we need it. The noise layer you see is just a gray fill, and on top of that we put a noise filter just to add a bit of softness to the general painting. And the last thing you'll see me add is a levels adjustment layer and a few final tweaks. And with that, we're done. If you got to the end of this video, I hope it was useful to you in some way. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, and if you'd like to see future videos, subscribe and ding the bell. Also check out my Twitter and Instagram for updates in my regular shenanery, and also my Twitch, which I should be returning to past the break. I've been Drew, thanks so much for watching. You guys have a wonderful holiday, and I'll see you in the new year.